Hi, you're watching Vantage Point, a very special session recorded on the sidelines of the Global Movement of Moderates, the first international conference. I'm here with Dr. Ernie Bauer, Senior Advisor and Director of Center for Strategic and International Studies. No stranger to Astro Awani, no stranger to Malaysia, very good friend indeed. And because of that, I would like to ask for your view. We've been talking about a lot of issues regarding Malaysia and US relationship, Southeast Asia and US, and Asia Pacific, and the new dynamics, international relations, trade relations. But I guess if we were to wear the glasses of being a moderate and look back at all this, Prime Minister Dr. Sri Mohammed Najib said it's not a new discourse, but it's a new initiative. But what are your views on it? Because you are looking at it from a lot of sides, actually.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's good to be here and good to see you again. I think the Prime Minister, this looking for a voice for the moderates is really important. And I think it's a very laudable idea and initiative that he has put together. From my perspective, sort of a foreign policy, security policy, business perspective, I'm sort of a blend of those three. Moderation is a good thing on all three counts. In terms of foreign policy, moderation is the middle. It's where the consensus is found. And I think on American foreign policy towards Asia, you're well aware, and you've covered this, I know, from reading your news, that you guys are well aware the United States is trying to pivot towards Asia. The part of the pivot is part of a grand strategy. The grand strategy is to engage Asia and be part of it, and be part of it so that not to sort of contain China, but to be a participant in a discussion where security rules, foreign policy guidelines, and new trade and investment rules are made by everybody. So with a lot of mutual respect, and find the consensus. So I think in that way, that's moderation. On the business side, businesses love moderation because it means stability. And I think on the security side, that's where they really love a way to have all players involved, have a lot more transparency, have a lot more trust, and I think moderation would be one of the words that you use to define a tactic to get to those goals.
It's when things are put to the test, sometimes we can see the real substance of it. And I guess if we take the Asia-Pacific region, how is it that whenever we talk about the Asia-Pacific and the Pacific itself, for example, even though there's no more Soviet Union, but if we say the US 7th Fleet, and then we'll talk almost with the same breath about China's military expansion.
Right.
And if I see articles from Europe, articles from United States of America, even articles in Asia would be talking about that. Are we actually living in the 21st century, but still carrying on the baggage of the previous times of the Cold War era, for example? So we're trying to fit China into boxes that's already there, where if moderation were really to be practiced, we should have an entirely new page and a new equation.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a good question. There's no way that another Cold War is good for anybody. It's not good for the United States. It's not good for the smaller countries in Asia. It's not good for China. I think that is why the U.S. is trying to support an ASEAN-based idea, which is to create regional security and trade architecture that gives China room to grow and be the big player in Asia. But it also keeps the Americans at the table. Since World War II, we've invested a lot in peace and prosperity in the Pacific. So we kept our guys on the oceans. We kept our navies out there. Tried to be a force for good and peace. Try not to get in anybody's way too much. Not easy for Americans sometimes, but I think overall the track record is pretty good. And I think the Americans don't have any intent to do more than that. What they want to do is accomplish a goal, which is to let China which is the big country that's probably changing the most,
Yeah.
have room to play, but not to dominate. And so when China, over the last couple of years, was enjoying its economic growth and started to test that economic growth with, can we use the economic growth to sort of assert our sovereignty in certain areas? And at least this is the way the Vietnamese and the Filipinos felt about, some of the disputes on the South China Sea. I don't think the United States wants to get into the middle of those disputes, but what we want to say is, hey, could we use the regional architecture that we've developed together to resolve these disputes through rule of law and peacefully? Because if China can come to the neighborhood, sort of like Indonesia did in ASEAN in the late 60s, then we'll all prosper tremendously.
When I look at it, it's funny how if you stay on the line of truth, you sometimes see things more clearly, and you stay on the line of moderation. Even before Obama became president, when we're talking about him running off against Mrs. Clinton, for example, we were already expecting that there will be this kind of new approach by the United States of America. However, we can plan, but things happen. Arab Spring happened, and the speech that President Obama gave in Cairo suddenly made irrelevant because of what happened a few months after, for example. So in that light, looking at the fast-changing world in the 21st century, would you say that moderation would also have to look at the environment of where things happen rather than just the players coming in or the players already there? If I can put that into the context of Palestine, for example, Dr. Morrison, in an interview I had with him before, said that, people say that America is not an honest broker, but it's only America that's playing the mediator role. So if we were really to test that, then some Malaysians would really be advocating that President Obama, on his visits to Jakarta, should stop by Kuala Lumpur, see how KL managed diversity, dialogue, and peaceful coexistence, and bring us together to the table, maybe, into the Palestinian-Israeli discussions, for example. I have to go for the first commercial break, but just testing the waters here with you on that. When we come back, maybe I'll get your views on that.
Okay, thank you.
After this short break. You are still watching Vantage Point. I'm still here with Dr. Ernie Bauer, and at his session, when you were presenting, you were seated right there, an American, beside an Ayatollah from Iran. So nothing more moderate than that at this global movement of moderates. But I guess if I were to test that in practical sense, where Malaysia wants to do that, at a very important level, at a global scale, how can we apply that to the Palestinian and Israeli conflict?
I think you'd be most welcome. It's sort of lonely for the United States, trying to be the broker for these very tough issues, right? In fact, I think a lot of Malaysians that I talk to don't realize that the United States is a major donor to the Palestinians. We give major funding to the Palestinians. We're trying to find a way for peace in the Middle East, and to find a way for Palestinians to have their identity and be able to live the lives that they want to live. So I think we'd really welcome the Malaysians' help on that. Indonesia has also offered to provide some thinking about that. So I think when you come into this area, and I'm not a Middle East expert, but when you come into this area, I just warn you that some of even the best, most rational ideas sometimes get crashed on the rocks of what is an age-old dispute between these two civilizations in the Middle East. But I think actually we have to find a way for peace. We have to find a way for the Palestinians and the Israelis to live side by side. So if Malaysia can help with that, I think that would be terrific.
The reason I raised the issue because the world is so interconnected nowadays that one incursion by the Israeli Defense Force into Gaza, and suddenly there's a cry in Kuala Lumpur, do not go to McDonald's, do not buy Nike. It's there in the Middle East, thousands of miles or kilometers away. but it's having economic impact here. And so interconnected that that's why the movement of the moderates will give some semblance of a systematic and orderly way of approaching these issues, grave issues that they are, but we must handle them with dialogue and discourse.
Yeah.
Your views on that?
I agree, but I think this conference has been terrific, and the Prime Minister's brought a lot of voices together. The voices are all sharing their views right now, but how? I take your point, but how? How do you put those that moderation to work?
Okay.
That's the challenge right now. I think we have to convert a lot of goodwill here. I met colleagues from, as you mentioned, Iran,
Okay.
Gambia, Malaysia, Indonesia, all around the world were here. I thought it was a terrific group. But I think everybody I talked to on the sidelines agreed. Where do we go now? What do we do with this goodwill? How do you use the voice of the moderates? What issues do you work on? And I think that's the challenge.
If I borrow from Dr. Mahathir's view last night, because he said he's not moderate, but the conference wants him to talk about the global financial architecture.
Right.
And that's also in need of moderation, because how come 1, 2, 3, or you name it, executive on Wall Street do something that have an impact of trillions of US dollars around the world, as far as Africa and to a farmer in South America or even in Asia. So what kind of moderation are we proposing here? And he's already looked at last night at global financial architecture, since you're also a businessman and an entrepreneur at that. So how do you look at the global moderate equation for the finance and trade side?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I enjoyed the Tun speech last night. I think from a business point of view, what would really help is global standards and global regulations. One of the hardest things as business people is you have to deal with regulations and standards that are different for every country.
Okay.
And to the extent that ASEAN is looking at this, and Malaysia is helping to drive it, but the extent that you can understand the regulations in a set of countries and apply those across the board, that would make business much more efficient. It would make products less expensive, and I think in a way that would be a good way to moderate.
Don't raise the issues of, if you want to look at the global architecture of finance, for example, you need to go back all the way to Bretton Woods. The players around that time was not inclusive of a lot of regions of the world.
Exactly.
So maybe the global movement of moderates can propose a new meeting that's more representative, hence a more reflective view of how it should be for everybody, not just for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 players.
I was kind of surprised that Tun went back to Bretton Woods too, for the same reason that you mentioned. Bretton Woods was a small club, but the global movement of the moderates, I think what it should do is support positive trends. For instance, if you look at the structure of the World Bank, the United States and others have now moved to include and increase the voting rights of developing countries, China, Brazil, Indonesia. I think that's a good start. Same in IMF, a developing country finance minister, the minister of Singapore actually chairs the IMF managing committee now. So I see a lot of change underway. The G7 has effectively been replaced by the G20.
Yep.
So this is happening. There is a movement. The world is adapting. And I think giving voice to acknowledging that, extending it, promoting it to move even quicker is a good idea.
There's more hope, but there's more complication maybe also.
Right.
Because if you look at the issue of whether or not the Wall Street executive should get bonuses, when the impact of what happened hasn't really been deciphered thoroughly, for example. So, and a decision in the United States of America, K Street or Main Street, but giving perceptions all across the world because everybody has an interest now.
Yeah.
So moderating that is a very huge task.
It is. It is. I think, I argued in my remarks that the ultimate moderating force would be the voter, would be people. And as the world becomes smaller, people get to vote in different ways. You can vote in your country. and if you have good institutions, your vote counts. You can vote now through opinion. And I think social media is helping people to sort of be able to vote globally. So you can, if you don't like something that's happening in terms of a global trend, you can sort of chime in. Hard to tell exactly how your vote counts.
Okay.
But global public opinion is now monitored by governments, by large companies. And so if you look at the power of groups like NGOs, over the past 20 years, the number of NGOs has increased exponentially, I think 1,000-fold. And the power of those NGOs is it's hard to measure, but it's clear that people have more influence than they did, 10 years ago. And I think that's a great force for moderation.
I have to go for the last commercial break, but once we are back, I would like to continue on the point that you raised about people power now. And people power is also enhanced, that power is enhanced multiple fold by the new technologies, social media and all that. Arab Spring is testament to that.
Yes.
And if Dato' Ernie has a way, Time Magazine version Southeast Asia will be giving front page to the voters out there, you guys, because you will be the agents of change.
That's right.
Not the demonstrators. So I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, let's start from there and link it to a lot of things, especially like Occupy Wall Street after this short break. You're still watching Vantage Point. I'm still on the sidelines of International Conference on Global Movement of Moderates. And if I can go to Dr. Ernie Bauer now, you mentioned the individual, the power of the people, social media galvanizing this. We saw that Arab Spring. We saw that Occupy Wall Street. But at the same time, the linkages, the reaction, the symbiosis with the governance system of a government, for example, is happening and it's morphing and it's converging. So here in Asia, wherever it is, no matter how developed we are, we still keep looking to Europe, America, for example, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we have this kind of thinking sometimes for some people that when you reach developed nation status, as people get more prosperous, a lot of problems will just fade away. But we look at Europe, developed nation, GDP, GNI, per capita income and all that, well and good. But what happened in Norway? Tragedy shocked us all, even here.
Yeah.
When we look at America, we look at how the Occupy Wall Street is moving and how do you deal with the big financial markets? So if we can take the leaf out of what's happening in America, how is it being discussed now? Because suddenly you have the Tea Party movement on the political side, and then you have the social movement like the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Atlanta, wherever else.
Right.
So it's getting more complicated. But for moderates to have a say, you must allow all sides to add their views and their voices. But you do know the sensitivities in these parts of Asia. A cartoon in Denmark might be nothing there, but people will be burning things here because they're so angry about what's being pictured as cartoon there in Denmark.
Yeah.
So
I think, that's a very good question. I think anger comes from frustration. Frustration comes from a feeling of not being empowered. If you feel like you can't influence something, you have no channel, you have no voice, you can get frustrated easily, frustrated to the point of violence. And I think, I think if you look at the social factors, as Tun Mahathir said, the grassroots causes of terrorism, I think he was right about that. People who are who don't have those outlets, who don't have the opportunities, are angry and they're frustrated, and that can result in violence. I think so. Moderation comes from a confidence in governance and a confidence in a system where if you get frustrated or you want an outlet, you can have it. You can have your word.
Sorry to cut you here, but because maybe the audience here, they weren't in the session.
Okay.
And you made the point where, yes, America is not perfect, but I trust the governance mechanism. And I hope that if there's something wrong that's not taken care of by the governance system, I can have that voting right to change that when the time comes.
Exactly.
So if I were to take that example and look at the issues now in America, But in between the election time, there's a lot of things already happening.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
true.
what Obama's going to decide on healthcare plan is going to have an impact right up until 2, 3 decades from now. So at the same time, what Newt Gingrich said, like Prof. Kishore Mahbubani picked up, it's just not acceptable in any parts of Asia, for example.
Yeah.
Because we will get angry because we've been identifying with the Palestinians maybe for a longer time.
Right.
So articulation by an individual carries that much more resonance. But we are being asked to trust more and more on the system.
Yeah.
Because that's the way to go.
Hmm.
So where do we draw the line?
You know, only you can decide. Only Asia can decide what it's comfortable with. I would just say that to make progress, you need sort of a Socratic environment where someone could make an argument. In fact, the Tea Party is a good example of this. They have a very extreme view. They're not moderates. But their extreme view came from a reaction to a period in America where we are sort of downsizing our economy. We went through a very hard time. We were relatively, I think, a frightened country after 9/11. And so there's societal and economic pressure on the United States, and ideas pop out, new ideas. The Tea Party is a set of very extreme ideas. There are other ideas that are populating, our scene, Occupy Wall Street, a lot of frustration. But Americans have the choice to go and listen to all these extreme ideas. I didn't very much care for Newt Gingrich's comment on the Palestinians. In fact, it really angered me. But you know what? I know that guy's not going to be my president. And that's the power and the trust you have in your ability to choose. And I think that gives you, it takes away the frustration. It allows you to move ahead. And you can shop in a market of ideas. And some of those are pretty ugly, flashy ideas. Some of them are really beautiful, transformative ideas. But if you can't shop in the market, you might not see, you might not have choice to go forward.
I want to hijack this discussion a bit because
Sure.
it's hard to get people who can comment on the American presidential race here.
Oh boy.
Because a lot of focus is now also in Asia. And if that is the case, how do you look at all this? There was no Tea Party before, there's Tea Party now.
Sure.
So there was no withdrawing from Iraq and Afghanistan. There's concrete plans and being executed even as we speak right now.
Yes.
So what would be the trend for the American voters on the average? Because there's so many choices, so many issues to look at. And sometimes there's this theory that when there's so many things, people just go back to basic and choose the right thing. So where do you think this presidential race would be heading?
I'm a pretty basic guy, but I believe that this is where people go in times like this. They go back to these core values: my family, my friends, economic opportunity. Can I have a job? Do I believe that if my kids study hard, will they have the chance to study? Can I afford it? Then if they study hard, will they have a chance to have a better life than I do? And I think those are the things that American voters are thinking about now. So it's very basic stuff. And if you're a politician with frilly, obtuse ideas, good luck. I think you're out. If you're a politician who can convince those guys in the United States who are worried about those basic things, you're going to get elected.
Whatever it is, Arab Spring notwithstanding or otherwise, President Obama is still very, very popular outside the United States.
True.
But inside, I don't know. Would any guy representing the Republican ticket really have a chance against President Obama?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
In America right now?
Sure. I mean, the CNN
That's
poll.
how that has changed from his very, very high ranking and ratings.
Look, it's a hard job.
Agreed.
It's
Totally
a hard
agree.
job to be president of the United States. He came in with, a lot of hard cards handed to him. He had wars in two countries. He had an economy that was in a tough space, all sorts of issues. I think he's tried to do a good job, but this is he owns it now. After 4 years, it's not someone else's problem. And the country is not out of the woods economically. We still have a lot of
unemployment.
A very divided country in terms of politics right now. Very partisan feeling in Washington. Bitter partisanship. And I think people aren't happy. And so you look at the CNN polls yesterday, and they have Obama in a virtual dead heat with Romney, even with Ron Paul. who's, I think a more extreme
Okay.
Republican candidate. So yeah, it could be, Obama could be president in November, or it could be a Republican.
But we would have to put our faith in the governance system of United States of America, that these policies, this building up of bridges with Asia and diversity around the world, whoever it is that's going to be president, even if he doesn't want to, Congress will be there to put some sense into it. So the changing policies wouldn't sway that much, because there are good works being done right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real commitment to a long-term policy, a long-term engagement, and a strategy in Asia. I don't see a Republican president substantially changing that unless we became really worried or really scared as a country, and we went very isolationist. If we elect somebody like, Ron Paul, then I think Asia would be rightly really worried. Not as worried as any American business or Americans, because I think he said that he would cut off funding for the United Nations and international organizations, cut off foreign aid, tax businesses for doing business overseas. This would be a disaster for the United States and for the international community. But I promise you that the Americans are not going to, we will not as a country vote for someone with such extreme ideas. And that's moderation.
Yes. We will hold that promise, because we know you will always be coming back to Malaysia. Inshallah is the word here.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Dato', for making time to
Thank you.
interviews.
Pleasure to see you.
Thanks to you for watching Vantage Point, and we'll catch you in another episode very, very soon. Goodbye.